Hey,
We're
hey.
live now. Hi. Welcome to the Great Reset. This is Ernie. This is Ted. I'm about to
I go straight for you so much, you've gotten us confused.
Let's switch roles today and confuse all of us.
Yeah. All right, Steve. Thank you for sharing that. Up next, Bill, can you share some great wisdom from your unique perspective?
This Bill over here. Let's go. There's only 10 components today. We can get through it in 5 minutes tops.
All right. So if I could ask your indulgence,
not to get through it.
So if I could ask your indulgence, I wanted to do so. So this is our 7th week of our 2nd season, and usually for the 7th week we do a kind of wrap up or post-mortem or retrospective, and we've had a fantastic, if occasionally annoying, even on my part, iMessage thread going this week, which I was really encouraged by. And, you know, there's been discussions about discipleship programs and how do we make this impactful for others. But I was hoping you would indulge me in, let me slide my, let's see if I can slide the. So the one problem is if I don't have the video in the center, I'm always staring off to the side, but I guess we can live with that.
It's a Zoom thing. We're getting used to people looking like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I wanted to try was actually a technique I learned about from of Walt Disney's called the 3 rooms. And the idea of the 3 rooms is that the first room is the brainstorming room where you come up with all the crazy ideas you can come up with. The second room is the editing room where you basically try and pull a narrative thread out of all those different ideas. And then the final room is the critique room where you try to tear apart that design in all the ways possible. Then you go back to room 1 and start over again. And I think it's similar to what they do in Pixar and Disney even today. But I wanted to see if we could actually co-construct or attempt to co-construct an answer to this question. So one of the things we talked about is how
just your remember you got the whole screen there. Do the thing where you share just that part.
Okay.
Like unshare.
It's sharing just that one tab.
Yeah. Just that, yeah, one window. Is that better?
Bingo. Yeah, that's like really huge.
Okay, now if I
I won't even have to go to the eye doctor now.
And if we do that, do you still see it centered on your screens?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I can center my video so I can look at myself and not stare horribly off to the side. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this is how they make movies. Sounds good.
Right. So the idea is
that's also design theory. I mean, that's design theory, yeah.
But the basic point is that I have many issues with the concept of education. 2 of them are, one, it is something we do to other people rather than a thing that we are doing together. The second is that there's a sense of completeness. You've been educated, therefore you're done. Or worse yet, you're a master and your only job is to teach others. And therefore, I've been focusing on this idea of a community of practice. It's all of us on this continuous journey to learn something important together. And the question that I kept getting hung up on, which I realized, oh, I don't have an answer to this, we should discuss this together, is what is the thing that we should be spending our lives getting better at doing? And I was thinking, I don't know if we can agree on an answer, but I think we'll learn a lot by trying to discuss the answer. And so the vision is this idea of, for us in the world to experience the fullness of God's kingdom, AKA love. So that's kind of the high level vision. But the question is, what's the mission? What is the thing we need to do to keep getting closer to that? And so what I wanted to do was start with room 1, and this is just a bunch of random different ideas I had of things that could help us get there. And I just wanted to spend the next 5 minutes or so just going around And having each of us say which things on that list they like, things they'd want to add, things they have some problems with, whatever. Just sort of refine and expand this list. All right?
Yep.
And just for a change, I'm going to call on Leonard first, because he's not showing us his video. And plus, he's the best dressed.
What?
Leonard? You still there? Oh, man.
Should have warned him 5 minutes ago. You were going to put him on the spot.
Yeah. Maybe he went to change into a t-shirt because we embarrassed him.
Because he made fun of his dress shirt.
I'd like to reframe the whole thing right now.
All right. Go ahead and reframe the whole thing.
No, I don't know about reframing the whole thing. Like, what should we be spending our time on? I mean, another thing is, you know, to succeed in life, or, you know, this is a Silicon Valley mantra, is, you know, do one thing and do it well, rather than
Right,
trying to
the
be all
hedgehog.
for all things. Yeah, the hedgehog principle, you know.
Stephen Covey, or I think it was not Covey, Good to Great guy, Jim Collins.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it may be a complicated thing. It may be a compound thing. But
But
the thing that I have
what's the one thing that that it's all about, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, it's interesting. I think Paul was contributing to our conversation here when he said, I know nothing but Jesus Christ crucified and him risen from the dead. I think he was summarizing, you know, his whole journey. What I think his answer to this was really, you know, sharing his journey and the one thing he needed to focus on above everything else.
Does that work? Encountering Christ crucified and resurrected?
Sure.
All right.
I wasn't expecting you to type anything or to edit one of the things, but yeah.
Sure. Bill, how about you?
I didn't understand. Can you scroll down a little bit? Number 9?
Dying to ourselves.
No,
so
no,
we
no,
can better
not that one.
represent
Oh,
Him.
8. I'm sorry, 8.
Incarnational transformation. So that was a bit of a buzzword, but the idea is becoming part of the world or other people and their challenges and problems in order to bring about redemptive transformation.
Yeah, that's close to what I was thinking. So that would be my top vote. Just want to second Ted's point that we shouldn't have 3 goals. Earlier in this week, there was like some 3 goals out there, and it's like, no, that never works. Especially in the church context. They always list like, here's our mission, 20 things.
Yeah.
They never get past the first one. So this was good. So I like 1. I think 1 and 8 go together in my mind. I'll probably think of one later, but the other one that spoke to me was 4, the understanding love of Christ. And those are my 3 votes.
All right, cool. Raising the bar. Stephen.
I am totally focused on 2, loving the other as he loves us. And I looked at all of the options. I looked at everything that was there. I looked at your prompt below. And I said, if there's one thing that I believe the Lord wants from me is to learn how to love each of the people that are around me. So I began digging up all the scriptural references to where that's stated, the 2 greatest commandments. And then Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, love is the greatest of all the things that we could do, of all the gifts that we could exercise. And in 1 John 3, Jesus commands us to love, and we must believe that in the name of his son, Jesus Christ, and love one another. And that's the command that Jesus gave us. And those who obey God's commandments remain in fellowship with him. Ultimately, that's what we want with whatever it is we do in our life. We always still want to have that fellowship with Jesus Christ. Guys, that might be the most succinct I've ever been.
I know. I think this is
I thought of number 2, mean, when Jesus answered this question,
Mhm.
in fact, he was answering this question in the, in the Last Supper, the last night. He said, "A new commandment I give you: love one another."
Mhm.
I mean, he was he was very clearly iterating off of. He was very clearly iterating off of the previous answer to the question when they, that they posed to him. How do you summarize the whole law? What's your view of it? And he gave them two answers. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we've talked about that already. Like, then he goes into this parable of the Good Samaritan, like clearly saying, your neighbor is the person you don't like. Making him the hero of the story in a very, very dramatic way, very over the top way. The thing I liked about number 7 is, Bill said that was the one. It's like, we have to show fruit, like loving the other. What does it mean to love? We have to define the love, and it has to be God's love. It has to be him through us, and it has to change things. I mean, not like your love isn't, if you're not able to help somebody, it's not meaningful. I'm not, love is an end in itself, but God's love has power. And, where's the beef? Jesus demonstrates his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, he died for us, overcame the cross. It's that type of love that we have to love for others. That's what he expects of us. There has to be power in that love. So I liked number 7, and I understand why Bill would resonate with that. It's like, okay, show me the beef. Actually help him. Incarnate the transformation. I like number 9 too, asking and answering the above question.
David, a reaction?
I said I liked it. I'm not voting for it. It seems like you're summarizing everything there. Yeah.
So
wait, you're referring to the whole, yeah. What are we supposed to do? Yeah.
I would go with, I'd like to go with number 2, 3, and 7 for 1,000, please. I think
1,000 crowns.
Wait, I did vote for number 1. You took my vote off for number 1.
So you're there.
No. Number 3.1. 3.1.
Yeah, 3.1. Sorry, that's what I meant too for me.
Okay.
But I mean, being that it's a .1, it's also 3.
They blur together, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, just being kind of missionally or minded, that I feel like I've been sort of led to over the years, and just talking about like how I used to with a friend of mine about transformation, and being transformed, and how kind of like a cause and effect. The more transformed you are, the more Christ-like you become, the more the stuff just sort of flows out of you. I think 3.1 or 3 just actually just all of 3 kind of does that. And I don't know, because I feel so incompetent in life. Number 2 works well for me.
Thank you. Leonard, you back yet? You still gone dark on us? So anyway, thank you for walking through this exercise with me. One thing that I think is most poignant for me is what David said about number 2. And that's because I've been part of lots of communities that espouse the idea of loving other people and being loved. And in practice, what happens is people do what's comfortable for them. And either you have a leader who pushes people to do things that are uncomfortable, or often, eventually, the leader stops people from doing things that are uncomfortable for him, or less often her. And so the interesting question that I keep wrestling with is, how do we keep pushing beyond, right? We should be pushing beyond our own limitations, beyond our own comfort circle. So let me just throw that in there. Growing beyond our own level of comfort. That gets to the question of missions and commission, and the Great Commission, and also the dangers of having leaders. Is this, and we also talked about how, you know, the traditional village had a lot of wonderful things going for it, which is that, you know, they had time for each other, they had clear authority, they were really invested in the health of their community. But the downside of a village is it's very insular, is that in our village, we take care of our village and maybe the occasional guest, but outsiders are still very much outsiders. And one of the interesting things about a city, as opposed to a village, is that it has a way, at least in theory, and often in practice, for outsiders to become insiders, which is a rare and precious gift. So anyway, that was room one. For room two, I had a thought about how to do this. So let's see if I can figure out how to get my WordPress here.
I'm still thinking about what you just said, Ernie.
Okay.
I typed in the comments there. We've all been part of communities that say they, you know, that we all hold a value of loving. Who's going to say, you know, who's going to put in their church mission statement? You know, we're a group that values comfort and conformity, so we don't really love. You know, like, you know, love is not important for us. Everyone says, but what we end up doing is what's comfortable for us. And then we either have a leader who forces people, you know, encourages people to do stuff that's not comfortable for them. But what generally happens, or alongside with that, is this leader or this leadership structure stops people from doing stuff that they're uncomfortable with. Interesting. What leadership is supposed to do, what a community is supposed to do, is what my team has done, or my teams have done. Make me more comfortable pushing myself and making myself uncomfortable, giving me a structure that I can push. And camaraderie in that things. Huh.
So here's the, yeah, I wasn't sure where we'd go with this, but this morning when I woke up.
I was sharing that because I wanted to kind of get more input on it. Like,
well, no, I think that, you know, this is where I think if we could actually figure out a way to solve that, it would make, it would break through the ceiling that I feel like we've hit with modern day Christianity. And I had a thought of a phrase, you know, Stephen and I had a little side meeting about co-construction, right? And that phrase just kept rattling in my head about co-constructing reality. And then the other phrase that came up was the idea of co-constructing context. I used the word systems originally, but that was a little too geeky. But let me just write down what I was thinking about this morning, and we can start with this as our room 2 and then tear it apart in room 3. Let's make this a list so I can keep it.
Who is involved in the co? Who's hiding behind those 2 letters?
Ah, that's the magic.
Yes, depends on who gets invited into that context, right? Who gets invited into room 3.
Okay.
I think that's all of us. Love it. Yeah, who is co?
So the idea, let me just kind of just walk through this real quick while you guys can digest it, and then we can tear it apart. The idea is that in every context, you have to have norms, you have to have some governance, some rules for what is and is out of bounds, just to be able to function. We human beings cannot deal with infinity. So the only way around that is to create contexts whose prime purpose is to spawn other contexts. And that, you know, just like a father wants to raise sons who go off and claim their own kingdom, or a father who sent his son out of heaven to earth in order to redeem the world. And if we can keep getting better at not just creating imperial contexts, which is what the church, the Western church in particular, has been remarkably good at for both good and ill, but launching people who know how to co-construct context, to say, hey, very much like this group here, it's like, hey, Ted and I came together around a very vague idea. And then we started accreting people like you, and all of you have played critical roles in co-constructing this context. And that's the role model that I think we have been largely lacking in modern Christianity. It happens quite a bit, but oddly enough, it's always like an origin story in the past. It's not like this is the most important thing we need to be doing now and next. The other thing is that we tend to create contexts that mirror what we have received or are comfortable with. But part of co-construction, especially in light of all the racial issues that have been, you know, raising to the surface in our country, is we, as the people of God, have to say, look, you are our people, this is our context, we have to provide whatever you need to grow in this. And it doesn't matter if I don't know how to do it. And one of the most beautiful things about what I've seen during this pandemic is people who are entrepreneurs or school teachers or just grocers, or would say, look, my community needs this. I have no idea how to do it, but I'm gonna find out because it's important, whether it's making masks or delivering meals or raising funds. And that kind of entrepreneurial spirit is that you define the body of people that you care about and whatever they need for all of us to get better. And, you know, one of the things that breaks my heart is when I see a leader who is so busy on maintaining the organization that they first become neglectful of their own learning and growth, and then often become protectful of their own lack of learning and growth, not because they're evil, but because they care so much about the organization as it is that they don't think they have another choice. And my dream is that we create organizations where those who may be leaders or founders or whatever, that the organization is as invested in the health and growth of the leader as the leader is of the people who've joined. And then the last
Can you
phrase.
repeat that? I didn't get it. Can you repeat what you just said?
Sure.
What do you want?
My dream is that we create a model of organization where the organization is as invested in the health and growth of the leaders or stewards or whatever, the people who created the context, as the leader is in the health and growth of the members.
So in other words, you want to see leaders who don't pretend like they know it all.
Don't have to pretend like they know it all, right?
Well, but you know, yeah, it's both ways. That's a gracious way of saying it. But most leaders, you know, it starts with them. They build an organization that. One of my premises, and I think maybe it's all of our premise, but is we're just trying to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff and understand better the organization that Jesus started.
The organism that Jesus started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, let's be fair, right? I mean, Jesus called, I think it's important, right? Jesus created an organism. He called 12 disciples, and they, you know, so the 12 was a thing that Jesus created. Everything else, deacons, the 120 in the fellowship, there were things that people, you know, deacons, overseers, you know, all those roles were things that were created after Jesus based on the models there. And I think that's actually kind of my point is, look, we need organizations. We need to raise money. We need to schedule meetings. We need to pay for Zoom licenses. Like, there is a thing that is structure and organization. But the organism is like an organ in the body. It's not the thing. It's a thing that helps the real thing thrive. And organizations, let me write that down, serve the organism, which is the true body of Christ.
Well, the other thing is, you know, like this whole idea of, okay, creating the whole discussion of creating authentic communities, for example, this church versus that church, and it's all about a healthy church and what defines healthy. Okay, so the church growth, people define healthy as lots of people there. Okay, growing. Okay, the discipleship people will define it as, you know, are you growing as you know, the spiritual well-being of the people. Okay, and I say both of them are totally missing the boat, because Jesus is saying, I want you to disciple nations. You're the salt and the light. I'm not judging you by how healthy you are. I'm looking at the society. You know, you have a role in something bigger, and my goal is to disciple the nation. The nations. Get your eyes off of yourself, externally focused.
Right, but Ted, you know who's been the most effective at discipling nations? The Marxists.
No, not the most effective.
In terms of getting entire nations to transform their ideology in a short period of time.
China to name one.
BS. The Americans are the best.
At discipling their nations or other nations?
Our nation and the whole world. Everybody wants to be democratic.
Okay, so there's, well...
I mean, the Marxists are short-lived. Johnny-come-latelys.
Well, okay, we don't need to discuss it.
I don't disagree that they've been effective.
Here's my point, though, right? Is that it's not enough to disciple the nations if you are not yourself being discipled, right? Because that is where we get people. I mean, I know lots of churches, their fundamental concern is getting the nation to behave the right way, right? So it's not enough to have the concept of discipling the nations, right?
Yeah, you have to have fruit shown with it. Yeah,
yeah. The question is,
I totally agree. Yeah.
Right, and that's the point. Is that there's these. That's what I think is, like, you know, that's a important missing piece, but we can't focus on that to the extent of missing the other pieces, right?
No, but I'm saying it's where there's no vision, the people perish.
Right. So let's go back to it. Right? Let's go back with this one, right? I think you'll agree with this, right? For us in the world to experience the fullness of God's kingdom, Does that work?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, sure.
Right, and I think that
No, I mean, okay, so here's the other thing, okay?
All right.
G12 movement, for example. And I'm not talking about the G, well, I don't know how familiar you guys are with. G12 movement was a movement of discipleship and, you know, and that specifically modeled off of Jesus's attention to discipling 12 leaders. And,
yeah.
And so he was very, very effective in certain contexts, and some of the most influential, largest churches in the world were implementing this model. And Guatemala, for example, and I can share this because the leader there, who's our friend, was sharing this himself. Guatemala was extremely effective in the G12 model, and they had some of the largest, massive churches. And I think they got to 56% of the population confessing evangelical, that they were born again. And their churches were healthy from that point of view. They were making disciples who were growing spiritually and who were reaching others, you know. But Guatemala is barely above Haiti in all the indicators of the health of a nation.
Right. So personal discipleship without societal transformation is, so let me go one step further, right? In Western Christianity in particular, our exemplar of perfect spirituality is a monk alone in his cell, right? What's the question I keep getting asked in my evangelical church? How's your quiet time going? How much time are you spending in prayer?
Let me throw out maybe Mother Teresa at the other end of the spectrum.
Well, but she's less Western that way, right?
Okay,
but
sure.
So
No, the John Wayne, yeah, sure.
Right, and so let's also let's so that's the Benedictine model, is the monk alone in the cell, and at the other extreme is the Franciscan model, right? Mm-hmm. The ascetic living among the poor and serving them, mm-hmm. And both of those things have an element of truth. But and then let's complete the circle. The William Wilberforce, social reformer, right? One of my great heroes, right?
Yeah. By the way, who was part of a community? None of these people are isolated.
Right?
None of them are isolated. Yeah.
Right. What's interesting is that we as Christians tend to compartmentalize those three things, right? I know people who have a genuine, sincere prayer life, and then they vote for a political agenda that they believe is glorifying God, and yet do it in a way that, let's say, does not always represent well the character of Jesus. And it's a paradox in some ways, right? That we have these visions of helping the poor, visions of being personally pure, visions of impacting the structures of society, and yet they get all tangled up in ways that have moments of greatness and beauty, and far more moments of eye-rolling and cringing. And I think that for me, this progression here is where it gets real. Is, do I really have a healthy concept of God? Is that creating an increasingly healthy self where I'm devoted to the in-group that is sharing this journey with me, but the thing that I want for the in-group is that we learn how to love the out-group the way Jesus did, not by beating them over the head with the law, but by incarnational transformation.
Yeah.
And that every step of the way, at all four levels, we are always asking ourselves and open to hearing, how can I do this more the way Jesus does it? And not, as I often see happen, say, this one is good enough, so I'm going to stop here and focus on this other thing.
Yeah.
And
I think, you know, in our text messages, we suddenly realized we can't use in and out.
sorry, the hamburger joint.
In group, out group. That
Okay.
was wrong-headed thinking to begin with.
Okay, so what would you? But the point is that
I don't think Jesus thought that way. For example.
I mean, he had his 3, he had his 12, he has his 70.
Yeah.
He had his inner circles.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to say in and out. That sounds.
Okay, I mean, I'm open to different terminology because I know it's all
context is fine.
Okay.
Context is a little bit more neutral.
Those of us who share our context and those who are beyond the context.
Much better.
Okay, fair enough. So anyway, that's a lot of random thoughts. I think this is the point where I should shut up and let you all talk, and then we figure out how to close.
But clearly, God would go monk in a monastery route. That's so clear, right? I mean, look, we have 30,000 denominations. It's the same issue. There's 30,000 different expressions of Christ. Some churches are the peace churches. They really do a fantastic job as peacemakers and reconcilers. Others, you know, so it's a fragmented body, but if you look at the collective, maybe it's okay.
Yeah, I love the phrase someone once told me once. You know, Israel had 12 tribes. It's okay to have your own tribe as long as you don't forget that you're part of Israel.
Right.
You know, and I actually think it's actually ironic. In some ways, I think we need more diverse and varied expressions, but we need, if you want, a common substrate where we can learn from each other, right? That to me is the heartbreaking thing. Is like when I meet with our friend at Disciples of Christ. What's his name? Barry. Like, Barry is a fascinating guy. I have to go through massive amounts of deprogramming to understand half of what he's saying because he's coming from such a different set of constructs and concepts. And to me, that's a tragedy because a lot of my friends won't make that emotional effort. They'll just write off those people as lunatics or heretics or whatever.
Yeah. So I think you make a great spokesman for the Catholic Church.
Well, so the Catholic Church
tries to keep it a little bit more together.
Right. I mean, there was a noble experiment and a noble goal, which went horribly wrong in the 15th century. And I think, let me just talk about the one about the business aspect of church. Is like, I'm going to go on a limb, and is that the hard part of doing this is actually the resource model. A friend of mine doesn't like the term business model, which I understand. But the point is that any endeavor requires resources. Jesus had women who contributed to the upkeep. You know, Moses called the people to contribute. There is a place for resources. There is a place for having a job. There is a place for being full-time devoted to the work of the ministry. And rather than saying this is bad and evil and we should avoid it, I would say this is something that has to be carefully and humbly designed, just as everything else. And if we can get the incentives right and aligned with our values, that is how we grow quickly and don't end up sabotaging ourselves. There.
Yeah, incentive sounds somewhat new. Useful.
Ted's putting in some very interesting comments in the chat. I wonder if Ted would like to talk them out loud so that our live audience can hear more of his thinking.
Okay. I have lots of thoughts. I can. I think I think we need to understand, someone talked about the church and Chuck Swindoll that he lead, the one that Chuck Swindoll leads. I like Chuck Swindoll also. And he says, you know, sometimes, I mean, we all understand that a church needs income and revenue to pay the paid staff, to cover the electricity. You know, if they're going to exist, they need revenue. We all understand that. but then he was expressing, I think, which is common, that sometimes it seems it's more about business than it is about ministry. But I also know friends that I can talk about who are amazing leaders, and their ministry is a business. And I think it's realizing that both are actually the same thing, you know, and both are needed, two different vehicles. I mean, it almost seems to me like we need to, like okay, so the church, I want the church to be more transparent, you know, with the use of the funds. I don't like it when we're manipulative in the sense that we say the tithe goes into the storehouse, which means your local church. Like, I feel like be transparent about that. I mean, both what you're doing with the funds, but also, like, if he was an investor, he would have to put a disclaimer and saying all the funds that you go actually, you know, go to me. I control them all, you know, like